Welcome back into the show. Thanks so much for tuning in. We are delighted as always to have a friend of the show and a guy who's been covering the sport in America for so long, providing so much coverage, a pioneer in soccer journalism in this country. Paul Kennedy on the show. Paul, how are you today?
Good. I'm glad to be with you again. I enjoy being with you and enjoy listening to your show, especially some of the shows you've done recently about parental issues that, to me I find interesting and bring up a lot of other issues along the way.
So I'm glad to have you back on. We are at a kind of for American soccer. I'm going to say this. You can voice your own opinion on this, but unfortunately, the start of the American soccer calendar. That's something we can get into maybe later in the show, the fact that we start in the spring and, go from there into the fall. I would much rather see the traditional kind of northern hemisphere fall to spring calendar, and therefore not seeing USL and MLS and other leagues kicking off in the spring. However, we'll set that aside for the moment. We are seeing all of these leagues kick off the season. Major League Soccer started last weekend, and the USL coming up this coming weekend with opening weekends for both of these leagues. Major League Soccer celebrating the start of their 25th season. What have you seen in and around this kind of, hallmark, anniversary season in terms of where the league is, what they're talking about, and how that kind of relates to where we are in the sport?
I think MLS is celebrating its 25th season. Last week it had a big event in New York where it brought in a lot of owners, a lot of coaches to talk about, the growth of the league and where it's going. And what amazes me is how fixated, conscious they are about trying to figure out where MLS's place is in the world of soccer. And I say it from the point of view of having been around, 50 years, literally, in the sense that I started following soccer in the early 70s. Soccer America, which I've been the editor of since 1985, was actually founded in 1971. So this is our 50th year. It'll be our 50th anniversary next year. And, to me, you have to look at it in a longer time frame. MLS obviously has, considering where it was 25 years ago, it's remarkable. In many ways, as a league and as a organization, Don Garber's correct that it has a lot of admirers around the world for what it's done among other leagues. But still, it's very much in its infancy and has a long way to go. And the point is that I think that at every level we're at, American soccer struggles with an American problem, which is impatience. And so, I think this year you see especially the influx of players, the spending that's been done. And while to some degree it will raise the level of play, it doesn't solve the problem that, there's no overall connection in the sense of, a lot of these foreign players are not going to, draw another TV viewer. They're not going to draw another season ticket holder, because there's still a dime a dozen in the world of soccer, players coming on transfer fees of $2, $3, $4, $5 million, which are for many of these MLS clubs records. But it's just going to take a long time for the sport to develop, and a lot of it is simply at the local level. And I think some of the issues that Bob Bradley raised of not everyone feeling connected is true. And, to find a way to change that is something that is essential. And it's something that I think, the question is, I think at some point MLS will have to come to terms with that and recognize that, if they don't like their TV ratings, there are things that need to be done to change that. But obviously, even as Bob admitted, is that all these things to change, say, the structure of a league or the overall structure of the sport in the country with promotion, relegation, things like that, will take a long time.
When we look at the league and, some of the points that you brought up, America likes the best. We like greatness. Great stories, great superstars, great teams. Excellence is something that attracts an American audience. We when we are looking at the sport of soccer, that attention is going out of the country. It's looking at leagues in Spain, England, Germany, and eyes are kind of going out. And you mentioned in kind of the age of the internet and accessibility, you can see pretty much any league, any cup, any competition. You can find a way to watch it where if it was in a vacuum, in a bubble, maybe it would make things easier for Major League Soccer. But the facts are what the facts are, and it is something that Major League Soccer, and I think it's not a Major League Soccer issue. I think it actually goes a level above. I think this is a U.S. Soccer Federation issue, and I think where Bob Bradley was talking about in terms of connecting things together, I don't think it is the responsibility of Major League Soccer, just like I don't think it's the responsibility of the Premier League or La Liga in Spain to do the work of its federation. I think it's the federation's job to do that and foster an environment where you have resources, where you have the opportunity to at least build something of excellence. In the news recently, over the last few days, I don't know if you saw this, but Tony Romo, retired NFL quarterback from the Dallas Cowboys, just signed a 10-year deal with CBS to be their lead analyst. And his 10-year deal is for $180 million to sit around, a few Sundays a year and be the lead analyst for their NFL games. That is, when you look at where we're at investment-wise, Major League Soccer can tout all of the investments that they have made so far, and they are still second or third rate in American sports, and they're second or third rate in global soccer standards as well. And so, yeah, you're the top dog in this country. You've made more investments and you've gotten way more subsidies from the federation than any other league or organization in the history of American soccer. And yet you still, to me, you still have to take into consideration that until more investment is made, we're not going to see the TV ratings grow. We're not going to see the angst turn into excitement and enjoyment while people still feel, excluded from the system and from an access standpoint. So when you project that out over, let's say, the next 25 years or 50 years to grow, I don't see where we are as major growth. I see it as incremental growth. And if we really want to see the sport take hold in a major way, it's going to necessitate much larger investments, which to me means we need to make rules and system changes to our system at a federation level that invites and rewards those investments. How do you see where we are in terms of investment standpoint compared to, the likes of, like I said, this Tony Romo deal with CBS, and then also the money that's being thrown around the game in Europe? How do you see that shaking out here in the States? Like, do you see or do you hear rumors from Major League Soccer owners that they're willing to double down and put even more money in to try to really get this thing up another level? Or is it more kind of, let's hold the line of status quo, incremental growth, and maybe one day we can get somewhere?
I think there's, the question is invested in what? And, the way I would look at it is, they're still in their infancy in the sense of, you look at things like the money that teams are spending on training complexes. Typically, they would include facilities for the first team, for their second USL team if they have one, and probably a portion or most of their academy program. And, you look at something like, say, New England, I'm not sure what the total was, but, Robert Kraft spent $35 million after spending no money, for years. But the reality is that just from an American point of view, which I think we need to start with, is, that's money that a college football program spends, every couple of years on treating their athletes in a special way, so that what's happening is not unique. And I think the other point is that a lot is happening even at the non-MLS youth level, but still, the amount of money that's involved in it and the amount of resources, and by that I mean connections of people who work on things, is so massive that it really, doesn't solve the issue, which is MLS is trying to play catch up, and the sport of soccer is trying to play catch up in this country. So I think those are issues that are really hard, and so it's going to be incremental growth, yes. And I think, to expect more given the circumstances and given the history and the time frame in which soccer started here is difficult. One of the things that I found interesting in the talk in New York was one of the owners who was there was Clark Hunt, whose dad Lamar has been involved in soccer back to the 60s. His father Lamar started the AFL, and he referred to the NFL, which he's involved in as the owner of the Super Bowl champion Chiefs, as celebrating its 100th anniversary this past year. And he said, well, you got to remember, and this is when some of the owners were talking about MLS being, in 10 years, the greatest thing since sliced bread, but him saying, how long a process it is. And, he put MLS in the context of, say, the AFL. If it was 25 years, it would be what was, pro football like in 1985. I would go back and say, if you looked at it 100 years, which would be 1919 when it started, and 25 years, it would be the mid-40s. And to me, still, that's where you got to look in terms of soccer in this country, where if soccer had, as a sport, had started to grow like we live it today in the 40s, everything would be so different for it, and to be able to develop in that, it would, the cost of sort of latching on to local resources, which is land for fields, media coverage, for a pro teams to develop, for minor league teams to develop, would have been so different. And the point being that whatever it would have accomplished, it would have accomplished without having to worry about the interest that fans had from abroad, because there was no television, let alone internet, to watch the sport. So I think those are things that are important to understand, that all of us are trying to buy the growth And also, it's just like, sorry, it's like all the stuff related to the youth level with parents spending and money stuff. They're trying to, buy development. And that's something that, is most of the times isn't going to work or going to work anywhere near as fast as we'd ever want.
When I hear what you're saying, and I agree in terms of the organic aspect of what you're talking about, that over time, it takes a while for this stuff to kind of culturally on its own, organically kind of play out. I follow what you're saying there. But while you were talking, there was kind of three different examples that kind of stood out to me where I go, okay, I accept that, but, and just to play a little contrarian with you for a second, how do you explain Atlanta United versus New England Revolution or LAFC versus Chicago? How do you explain that we have more registered youth soccer players than any country in the world, or the fact that European teams are clamoring to come into the U.S. market every summer throughout the year? They're opening offices in New York. They identify, and I even just got off the phone recently this week with someone in Europe who's talking about some of the possible changes with Brexit in the UK and how England are looking to position themselves as another landing zone at 18 for American players, much like Germany, to be able to start coming into American soccer and finding talent and setting up shop. So how, with all of those different examples, like I look at it and go, I look at an Arthur Blank who put money into Atlanta and has been rewarded for it. I see that what LAFC has done in LA and has been rewarded for it. I see the millions of families that are involved in the American soccer ecosystem, and we can obviously get into the monstrosity and three-eyed, four-nosed beast that is pay-to-play soccer, and that's a whole nother conversation. But again, these European teams, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, all coming in, opening offices in the States and trying to have a big presence here because they identify this as a massive potential market for them. When everyone else is seeing it, and then you see even these examples in specific markets, even within Major League Soccer, where it's working, where they've put the money in, doesn't that kind of say to you and to all of us, like, okay, if we just did more of those things, we could build this thing better, faster, and not have to wait another 50 years to see the American soccer ecosystem really begin to grow at a really faster pace and reach a higher level of quality, viewership, participation, excitement, etc.?
I guess the issue, I'll disagree with you, but I guess my only point would be is what would be, each of the metrics are different in the sense of, I agree with local attendance, things like that. National viewership is, to me, is going to be the last thing that happens. Again, just because of what I would argue is the lack of connections, and that goes back to, a little bit what Bob Bradley said, and I would use the example, and I use it all the time, where when I was a kid, I grew up in the New York area, and my favorite team was the New York Jets, and my favorite athlete was Joe Namath, who was from Western Pennsylvania, went to the University of Alabama, and so when he played for the Jets, he not only had a New York audience that, every Sunday everyone in that town was going to follow him, but you had the same thing in Pittsburgh and the same thing in, across Alabama. And those type of connections for soccer has never developed in this country. And it's going to be a long ways to take place. I mean, you had an example last weekend of a kid from Alabama debuting for FC Dallas in Tanner Tessman from Birmingham, who's now the third player who's turned pro with some degree of notoriety from Alabama. But the question is, until that interest takes off there in terms of some, big spark, it's going to be tough for the TV viewership. All the other things are true, meaning, if you had told me 3 months ago that Nashville was going to get 60,000 fans for their opener, I would have been stunned, meaning they were getting 4,000 last season in the USL as a very, very underperforming team. So it is possible. And, we'll see. I think the biggest one will be interesting to see is what happens in Chicago with a new owner. They announced today that they'd signed, or this week I think it was, that they announced that Arlo White was going to be announcer games this summer. And so clearly the new owner there is trying to shake things up, and we'll see what happens.
When I was in Nashville for the U.S. Soccer AGM, I encountered several different people throughout the city, airport, hotel, etc. And when they found out why I was in town, they would be like, "Oh yeah, we heard we're getting a soccer team," not recognizing that soccer had been around in the city in some form or fashion for several years, starting this year, which kind of goes to my point, which is the teams, the organizations like in Atlanta with what Arthur Blank has done there, what LAFC has done, what Portland has done, Seattle, where they have really gone kind of all in on let's build this thing locally. It seems to me that Nashville never really made that push until they got MLS, and then that leads to a whole series of questions in terms of, well, why wouldn't you do it before? And I know some of those answers are, well, no matter what we do, we have a glass ceiling, we can't go up. But also, it goes back to, if we're really going to grow the game at all levels, Bob Bradley's right. We've got to connect this thing together to give incentives to places like Pittsburgh and New Orleans and others who don't have Major League Soccer outlets available to build something, because ultimately, if we do want that Joe Namath American football story to repeat itself throughout soccer on a regular basis, we should be providing, pathways and channels and opportunities for clubs and players and coaches to rise through the system that's connected together to get those stories out. If you are an Alabama kid, the one that you just highlighted, just like Chris Richards, you have to leave the state to find a pathway, and oftentimes you have to leave the country to find the biggest and best development opportunity as well. So, when I look at where we are in Major League Soccer's 25th season, and all of the things that they've already accomplished, and yet the things that are left undone, to me, if I'm the federation, I'm going, I want to see, from a federation standpoint, if I was Carlos Cordero, I'd be sitting down with Don Garber and go, hey, look, I want to see Atlanta, LAFC, Seattle, Portland be the league standard, not the outlier. And I want you guys to come to us with a plan to get you guys there so that we can build this thing bigger, especially if we're going to have a conversation about a renewed Soccer United marketing deal where we're getting, a few thousand fans to U.S. men's national team matches that Soccer United marketing is supposed to be, helping get butts and seats for, obviously isn't working out very well. These are the kind of things from a leadership standpoint that I think conversations need to be had at the federation level to find out what are places places like Atlanta and LA and FC and Seattle and Portland and others are doing, and finding ways to raise those standards up across the league in order to have a better shot at higher ratings, viewing numbers. It's crazy to me that we're not trying to, or at least it doesn't come across to me, that at a federation level we're pushing hard enough from a standards standpoint. I believe that we have to have a lot more investment, but I also think to go along with that investment, we have to have higher standards as well in order to stimulate growth and not just wait on a 25 or 50 year kind of organic grassroots approach and hope that, by the time our kids have grandkids, that we're, a prominent sport in this country. And then when you take all of that and compare it to the comments of, some of the Jorge Mas and the lead owner of LAFC talking about how they believe the league is going to be at the top of the heap in the next 10 to 15 years. I just don't see where they're at right now and the things they're doing right now to get them there. What do you see in relation to some of those comments that came out last week? Miami, Inter Miami, and LAFC's ownership talking about, their projections of where the league is going to go over the next 10, 15, 20, 25 years. I mean, I don't see them closing the gap with what they're currently doing.
And the sort of the irony was they made the comments about they were going to be the best, and then 2 minutes later into their remarks, both Larry Berg of LAFC and Jorge Mas of Inter Miami both brought up the $64,000 question, which is how are they going to get TV viewers? Meaning, and then they both brought up media revenues, and so the point being is they say it's going to be there. Then when they ask them what it's going to take, they say, well, it remains to be seen, and I don't see, if it's the issue of TV money, I think they could, find a way to double the revenues, but even that's a drop in the bucket. You look at the money that, let's say going back to the CBS example with their lead analyst is, that's like a quarter of or a fifth of the money MLS gets, for its entire TV package right now. And it's something that it's going to take a while for, I don't think it's going to ever change. That it's going to be a huge TV moneymaker, and I think at that point it's going to be a matter of seeing what's how owners view their ability to grow and spend more money in players and all the things that they want to do and everyone wants them to do at the same time.
Looking at where we are from a media presence side, you've been around for a while, and you brought up the lack of media coverage, media scrutiny when it comes to American soccer. How do we change that? What needs to change in order for that to be a bigger presence? Whether that's more programming, more channels, more networks, whatever. How do you see where we are with American media in terms of the soccer in this country, the coverage of the game, and what needs to change in order to help improve the game in that area?
I think it comes down to those who are following the sport, making sure that they let those decision makers at the media companies who they follow know how important it is what they do. I think one of the greatest examples of this would be, again, we talk about Portland as being this most remarkable soccer market, and in many ways, it's along with Seattle, it's probably the most unique in the country. But this off season, the Oregonian, the main paper in Portland, moved their longtime soccer writer to join the beat covering the NBA Trailblazers, Portland's local team, and they have not replaced her. They're going to have a stringer, a very good stringer, Caitlin Murray, cover the sport, but at a much less, with much less time spent and obviously much less money involved. And the bottom line is that decision was made on the fact that for however great soccer is in Portland, still in the order of things, the interest compared to other sports was less. And in this day and age, the Oregonian, like all daily papers, with a few notable exceptions on the national level, are struggling mightily. And, there are a lot of MLS teams that don't have full-time beat writers. There are only a few teams that ever even travel with their teams. And it's a huge problem. I mean, I would look at even something like, like ourselves. I mean, Soccer America at the end of the day is a very small publication. And, we have survived 50 years, but it's very hard. But the point being that for us to be around and to have some voice and in the sport, which we do and we're very proud of and we work on, to me is for us makes us proud, but it shows a problem that someone small like us has to play such an important role. There's a problem in this sport, meaning that something like what we do, would never exist in, say, football or basketball or baseball, and probably hockey too.
So in terms of changing that, lack of coverage, is that fans speaking up? Is that, kind of chicken versus the egg deal?
It's very hard. I mean, to me, it's a matter of, and again, it's, people saying the next generation is going to be the soccer generation. But to some degree, in this case, say in terms of newspapers are read by older people. And so until 25 years, when, a 25-year-old today, is going to want to read about the Timbers and doesn't want to read about Oregon State or Oregon football or basketball or the Trailblazers, it's going to be down the road before that would change. And, but in the meantime, you have the media landscape changing drastically and suffering for it.
So when you take a kind of a 50,000 foot, view to survey American soccer, do you have 2, 3, 4 things that you think if this was done, and this was done, we could see growth speed up in this country?
Yes, and there are things that, that would, if somehow soccer figured out how to latch on to high school soccer as a major contributor to a player's development, that would in of itself change everything. Obviously, one of the biggest problems that soccer's had is that it very early on decided that high school soccer could not help and was a hindrance and abandoned it. And if you look at every other sport, even though other sports like baseball and basketball and hockey, say, are no longer relying upon high school entirely, and have their own huge pay-to-play problems today. That central system still connects communities locally. It connects the sport in the state that ways that soccer struggles for. And I think if you look at so many states where it's also very simply the fact that high school sports is the one solution to pay to play, where everything is paid for by your by local taxpayers in terms of the facilities and the staff, even if historically coaches at the youth level have been at the high school level have been quite poor. But that's, I think, not an issue anymore, and could be the number one thing that could if not necessarily speed the growth, but solidify the growth for it to take off soon.
So let's go there for a second. High school soccer. When we look at the landscape of high school soccer, every state has kind of their own seasons. Their own rules, when they play, how many matches they play, how often they can train. Is in order for high school soccer to play a bigger role on the high schools. Obviously I understand where you're going and agree with your ideas surrounding the fact that you have facilities and you have these other sports that have been kind of nurtured in the inside of the school context. But specifically to the soccer context, it seems as though the sport, whereas basketball is always played in the winter and baseball's, for the most part played in the spring, and American football generally in the fall. Soccer takes place in all three seasons, depending on what state you're in.
You have neighboring states that are different.
Right. So how important is it to try to bring, if you're going to do something like that, to make that a bigger part of the process, to find a way to standardize that experience to where, you find the sport operating in the same seasons around the country? Is it important to do that, or does it matter in terms of uniformity and length of season, how many matches? My brother-in-law is a high school soccer coach, and I've often asked him, with everything that you have, why would you not just basically have your high school play, August to May, a match every weekend, and train a few days a week after school and play? Why would you not do that? Why is it so condensed? In Alabama, it's a season that takes place in the spring. In Florida, it's in the fall. In Mississippi, it's in the winter. And so you have just three states that are all, touching each other throughout, or touching either side of Alabama, that are all three in different seasons and timelines. How important do you think uniformity is into that equation?
Yeah, I'm saying you're right, meaning, and I guess my point is that, what I believe it might be a pipe dream, but the point is that it is, if the alternative is to go it alone, which, youth soccer is, it's never going to develop those local connections with people that are important for spurring and developing community and statewide interest. And I think that, it would be like the difference between, when my son played baseball and he played basketball in high school. He played a little bit of travel basketball. He played a lot of travel baseball. And, his high school team, whatever they did was going to be in a local paper. But the travel baseball teams he played on in the summer once he graduated from Little League, which had a great community identification, the local papers could care less. And that's something that, it's the whole thing of one of the great critiques of say, the Development Academy, where you have, in theory, the best players in any area playing, but you go to a game and, if there are 50 people there, it's lucky, and if 10 of them are not family members or friends, you'd be shocked. So it's something that's where, that's a huge issue for sort of developing the everything around the sport to make it important.
Do you, when you look at where we are in terms of, finding solutions in your coverage over the years, have you found people to be open to ideas like what you're talking about, or is it just like falling on deaf ears?
It depends. I mean, I think, I would say more recently, to me, the issue is, and a lot of it goes back to, I would say, the Federation, which is, as an opportunity, but also historically has played a laissez-faire, had taken a laissez-faire attitude about the development of the sport, not just at the pro level, but at the non-pro level, which meaning that it has let leagues grow up on their own, professional leagues I'm talking about, in the same way it's let U.S. Youth Soccer, AYSO, SAY work on their own, and then now in the last 10 years or so, U.S. Club Soccer. And, so it's never taken a real interest in trying to, not change things, but look, take a serious examination of the issues that to make everyone recognize these are the problems and these are the steps, if there are steps, to change things. And I would use the example of, the development of the youth task force that Carlos Cordero instituted after he was elected president in 2018, where in their own regard, each of the subcommittees that were developed and the issues they are working on are important issues to the people involved. They don't even begin to address a lot of the bigger issues that are involved in the sport of soccer in this country. And unless there's a discussion about it, we'll never, recognize and say, okay, collectively, if we want to move in a direction, we got to do this. And if we don't want to agree on that, fine, and we're just going to continue the way they are, and have to recognize that. And I think, one of the huge missed opportunities that have taken place, and it's something that we in our little way at Soccer America try to touch upon. In that, in some ways our rebirth came 2 years ago when we went behind a paywall, but also because of the failure of the U.S. to qualify for the World Cup, everyone started asking questions. And, we find our job is as opening conversations and looking at what's being done individually to see both what are some of the answers and what are some of the roadblocks and why things aren't developed. And, again, without a bigger media presence, that's going to be hard, meaning that without something like, ESPN or New York Times or even The Athletic covering a lot of these issues and examining of them, this conversation will never take place.
Well, a while back on the kind of first iteration of this show, which was a short form podcast called Soccer Works, I talked about the Youth Soccer Task Force. This was back in 2018. But Fred Allen once said about committees, he said, a committee is a group of the unprepared appointed by the unwilling to do the unnecessary. and so for me, I look at where we are in this country, and if we're going to rely on committees and task forces to fix our issues, I think we're going to be staring at each other 25 years from now, 50 years from now, still asking some of the same questions. And I would much rather see progress and more growth, as we look into the future. Learn some lessons from the past, get better at what we do, and ultimately find ways to connect everyone together and reward them for their investments, and investments not just of their money, but their time, their sweat equity, their talents, etc. So, Paul, thanks for joining us on the show as always. We love getting your insight and perspective as we roll into the 25th season of Major League Soccer. How can people follow your coverage of the league, your coverage of American soccer and sports in general with Soccer America?
You can follow me on Twitter at PKEdit, and you can follow Soccer America at Soccer America, and go to our website, socceramerica.com. You can sign up and start off by getting some free articles each month, and then hopefully if you're interested in subscribing, we'd love to have you.
Well, Paul, we always appreciate your time and coverage of the sport, and thank you for that. Thank you for all of your work over the decades in covering the sport, and hopefully more and more of us will continue to shine lights on the sport in different areas, and we can see some growth going forward.
Well, I enjoyed being with you, and I, as I said, I enjoy your show, and I encourage everyone else who is listening today to follow you and your other guests, because you're all very interesting.
Well, always appreciate the time. Thanks for coming on the show. We'll be right back after this.
No one, no man, no woman, no child should ever have to drink green water with bugs, with algae, with disease in it. Bad water and a lack of toilets kills more people than all the wars in the world. We know how to bring clean drinking water right now to every single person on earth. And when you can bring water into communities, it truly transforms them. It changes everything. Or you could know that you'd made a difference. You could know that you had truly impacted the life of a family, of a community, of a region. There was either clean water or there wasn't. We believe in a world where every single person has clean and safe water to drink, and we will continue fighting until that happens.
That is our show for today. Thanks for tuning in. As always, we appreciate Paul spending some time with us today, and we always appreciate you watching and listening and following the show as well. You can watch it on BegaTV.com, on DanielWorkman.com, on Facebook.com/WRKMN, or on Twitter. You can catch me on Instagram or Twitter at Daniel Workman. Thanks for watching the show. We'll see everyone again tomorrow.